Hi everyone, I'm Chyill and welcome back to another Battlerite discussion video. Today I'd just like to talk about the patch 1.3, or as I like to call it, the Zander patch as well, which will be coming out soon in a couple of hours because as I'm recording this, the game is being patched right now. So as you may know, Zander is coming out today, the winter event is over, and we will also have a couple of general UI changes and some hero balance changes as well. As some of you may have already guessed, Poloma, Destiny and Thorn have been nerfed, and Alysia, Ivar and Ruh Kaan have been buffed, in addition to Bakko actually. Bakko has actually got a few buffs, and Varesh has also gotten a bit of nerfs as well, because I think SLS found him to be a little bit strong. So we'll look through the patch notes together today and see what sort of changes did SLS do to the champions. Okay, so scrolling down here, we have some general updates. I think it's pretty much mostly just UI changes. It says here that the default loadout is not displayed in game if you have at least made one custom loadout. So that's fantastic because a lot of times it's like it just takes up a space and it's quite pointless. I thought they would have allowed us to maybe change it up a little bit as well, so that if we were to be AFK when the Battlerite loadout selection phase is sort of taking place, it would at least choose one of your predetermined or one of your preset loadouts to be the default loadout. But I guess maybe they would just take the one that's on the left. So if you want to set up, my guess is if you want to set up one of your loadouts as your default loadout, that it would pick automatically if you were AFK, then I guess you could do that, I think, because from what I understand, since the default loadout, or what they call the basic loadout now, is no longer displayed in game, I think this should be what happens, I think. Another big one is the sweeping the mouse over hard elements no longer interrupts the casting of abilities. I believe a lot of times when you're actually trying to aim some of your abilities and you accidentally sweep your mouse over some of the hard elements like the scoring or like the abilities at the bottom, it actually disrupts your aim a little bit. And so I think this fix means that it should no longer happen, as far as I understand it. I'm not too sure if it is, but I think that's what they mean. So those were the two big ones in under the general updates section. Moving on to champion reimbursement, this applies to all the free-to-play players who haven't bought the All Champions pack. So now they will reimburse the cost of your champion when you buy them, but it depends on what the price of the champion is currently. So you say you bought Alysia for 2,000 or something, that's just a number, right? Okay, I'm sure she doesn't cost 2,000 battle coins, but just for example, if say you bought her with 2,000, but when you actually buy the All Champions pack, she actually costs 1,000, then you would just be reimbursed 1,000 and not 2,000. I think it's just a lot easier for SLS to code it that way so that they don't have to store what everybody bought their champions for, I think. So yeah. Anyway, it's just all good news. You do get some form of currency back when you do buy the All Champions pack. So there you go, free-to-play players. This should be a pretty good change. Moving on to the UI, I think these are just mostly fixes and something to do with name changes and stuff. And I don't think they are really important, so I'll just quickly skip over them. And yeah, it's not important, at least from my point of view right now. Moving on to the new champion, Zander, finally. I've seen some of the previews for Zander where they showcased his abilities, and then I saw some of the exclusive streams that they had where a few players managed to get their hands on Zander and test out his abilities and all that. Personally, I really love his kit, and I think he's probably going to be one of my favorite champions to play because of his utility and his mobility and all that. Even though I can feel like his weakness is kind of like his self-heal, a bit like Poloma, where she doesn't have a lot of self-heal. But otherwise, I feel like his kit is really fun to play with all that trickery and movement and all that, and utility. So I'm really excited to test him out and play with him a lot more in the next couple of days. But we will cover him in a separate video, so I will just skim through what Zander's got to offer in this video, but within the next couple of days I will have a separate video just for Zander. So yeah, so if you haven't already seen his abilities or know what his abilities do, check out the patch notes. They have everything here. The link should be down in the description below or in a comment below. They've listed down all his Battlerites down here as well. Again, I would not cover this in this video because it will make this video exceptionally long. Plus, I can't actually show you the gameplay, and that makes it a lot harder to imagine what's going on, especially if you haven't watched any of the previews or the review streams and all that. So we will cover this in a separate video once we can actually get some gameplay footage, and yeah, stay tuned for that. There will be Zander chests and the bundle, just like how they handled Alysia, because the bundle gets you a few chests plus the legendary outfit and all that, and Zander chest basically guarantees you one Zander drop, whether it could be rare, epic or legendary. So these are mostly just cosmetics, so we just skip that for now. Moving on to the champion updates, which I think most of you would be here for, and you know, to hear my thoughts on the champion updates. First of all, we have Alysia. So basically, SLS realized that for Alysia, her biggest weakness is being rushed down, and so they pretty much buffed everything about her actually, including a part of her damage output, and her survivability is I think a lot better now. Of course, we have to wait and see like what are the actual effects of the patch. But personally, when I play with Alysia before the patch, yes, she is weak to being rushed down, but when she's not being rushed down, she can actually offer a lot of damage and CC and all that. So with all these changes, I think she would be in a pretty good spot. I'm not sure if she'll be too strong because I feel like she has been buffed a lot, but I think these changes will definitely make her a little bit more fun to play and less unforgiving, I think, especially for less experienced players. So we'll go through some of these changes and see what they've done. So they've reduced the cooldown of her mouse 2 ability because they felt like she wasn't able to apply as much Chyill, because her mouse 2 ability is one of her main ways for applying Chyill. So they reduced that cooldown from 5 seconds to 4 seconds. This is actually an indirect buff to her damage potential, since she can cast her mouse 2 very often now as compared to before. So that's a nice thing, I would say. Makes her less unforgiving, especially if she misses her mouse 2, because when she misses her mouse 2, she doesn't apply Chyill, she can't freeze people, and of course she also misses out on the damage. So yeah. Moving on to her spacebar ability, they have reduced the cooldown from 8 seconds to 7 seconds, and the max range has been increased from 7.5 to 9. So this is just a direct buff to her survivability. I feel like she really does need it, because otherwise she just gets rushed down really easily. Her flash freeze, like the base flash freeze ability, has its radius increased by about 10%. So that's really useful, because before this, we always had to take the Battlerite, which increased the radius of her flash freeze ability just to make it more consistent. So now that her flash freeze itself already has like a radius that is quite big from the get-go, I think this should free up a slot from her Battlerites, so that she can take something else which could boost her survivability or her damage potential, I think. So that's a really nice change. Moving on to her ice block, the duration of her ice block has been reduced from 3.5 seconds to 2.8 seconds, and that's a buff because she would be stopped or stationary for a lot shorter. Plus, 2.8 seconds is long enough for her to avoid whatever large ultimate ability that she was trying to avoid with the ice block. So I think that's a good change. Also, another buff to her survivability, since she heals up much faster in that 2.8 seconds as compared to 3.5 seconds. Her snow cone has been changed a little bit. They reduced the channel duration, basically meaning that she can freeze people much faster, but the cast time has been increased just a little bit. But I think this is just to offset the decreased channel duration. They changed the ticks and the damage, but I think most people use the snow cone just to freeze people. So this is again another buff to her snow cone. So it's pretty much just all around buffs for Alysia, which I really like, because I really enjoy playing Alysia. I'm not sure if this will make her too strong, but we will just have to see. A couple of changes to her Battlerites as well. Frost Nova, Chyill duration increased from 1.6 seconds to 2 seconds, perfect. Inflicts root for 1 second to enemies already affected by Chyill, also very good, because this is also another direct buff to her survivability, especially against melee champions. Her Twirl recast duration has been increased from 1.5 seconds to 1.8 seconds, and the range has been increased from 3.3 to 4. So Twirl is this Battlerite which you can get, which lets you have that little extra jump at the end. So they made it a lot more user-friendly for that second jump. So you can jump a little further and you can wait a little longer before you make that second jump, which should again improve her survivability. Moving on, Wintry Blast has an additional effect now which increases the chill duration. Personally, I never took Wintry Blast much, so I'm not sure if this would increase the pick rate of Wintry Blast by a lot more, but we'll have to see. Blizzard, the radius bonus has been decreased from 20% to 10%. Reason for this is because they already buffed her base E radius, so this is just to compensate for that. And this was the Battlerite that I was talking about that I used to pick almost all the time. Like, I don't think it's necessary now because her E ability already has like its radius increased by 10%. So, but it's just them compensating for the fact that, you know, the E has been buffed. And Arctic Cloak, Lesser Glacial Prism can be applied to allies. Again, this one I don't think it's really worth it because the Glacial Prism doesn't last really long to begin with. Plus, you're not always going to be stacked up with your allies. So, yeah, probably still not so useful, but maybe there might be uses for it. I'm not sure. Moving on to Ashka, they mostly just fix the bug. And then on to Bakko. Bakko has got a bit of buffs. They pretty much included the, what was that Battlerite called? The Battlerite, a Wall Slam, I think, as they say here. And it basically makes it so that his E, when he charges an enemy into the wall, it will give a stun. So that is now baseline, but they reduce his damage to sort of compensate for that buff a little bit. SLS has also made some changes to his Battlerites. So, for example, Heroic Leap, which I'm not too sure what Heroic Leap did because I don't remember all their Battlerites by name. But apparently now it's compatible with the EX space, so that's nice to see. They replaced the Battlerite that they pretty much merged with his normal E ability with Dizzying Dash, and basically this lets him stick to enemies a lot easily, or a lot easier. Basically, Shield Dash now inflicts a 15% snare for 2.5 seconds. So what this means is that if Bakko pushes an enemy with E, even if it doesn't hit a wall, it still snares the enemy for 2.5 seconds. So this lets him stick to the enemy much easier. And if he does push an enemy into a wall, then he does deal 6 bonus damage. So it's pretty cool. I think it's a good change. I haven't really seen much Bakko recently, so I think these are some pretty good changes to Bakko. And it should make him a little bit more viable, I think. So moving on to Blossom, it's mostly just some text changes. So on to Destiny. She has been nerfed a little bit because she is quite obnoxious to deal with. And so yeah, I think most of it was onto her mouse 2 and her E abilities, because I think most people had complaints about the mouse 2 and the E ability, and not so much on other things. Like, she does still need her spacebar to work properly for her to survive and all that, because after all, she doesn't really have a lot of iframes. So yeah, let's just go through some of the changes now. Her mouse 2 ability has got its max damage reduced from 32 to 30. They reduced the movement curve during casting. I think this means that, like, because she gets to move while she's casting it, I think this means that she cannot cover as much ground as she's casting it. I'm not too sure what this means, but I think that's what it means. And the projectile radius has been reduced from 0.45 to 0.4. So my biggest complaint when I fought against Destiny was that her projectile radius was too big. Basically, even if you thought that you avoided her charge bolt, it would still hit you. So I think this is the biggest change to me. The max damage reduced by 2 isn't that big of a deal to me, but I think this is the big one for me. Her plasma wall snare factor has been reduced from 50% to 25%, and the snare duration has been increased from 1.2 seconds to 1.5 seconds. What SLS felt about the E ability was that the snare factor from the plasma wall was too big, so they were trying to reduce that snare so that people would have a reason to use her Shift E ability, that is the prison, the one with the circle, and when people walk through it and they get stunned, as compared to a normal E ability, because after all, the E ability doesn't cost energy, but the EX version does. So I think that's what they were trying to do. And they also reduced the transform weapon, that is EX Mouse 1. They reduced the duration and the shield duration of the ability, so it just basically makes her a little less tanky, especially when she uses the EX Mouse 1, which I think is quite fair, because it lasted pretty long before this patch. Onto some Battlerite changes for Destiny. They reworked the Sizzle Battlerite. I believe this is the Battlerite which gave Destiny the rooting effect for her E, and it basically now doesn't give a root, but it increases the snare factor to 40%, which is still lower than before the nerf, so bear in mind. And it increases the duration of the snare from 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds, which is not too bad actually, because now the snare duration, if you take Sizzle, is a lot longer, but I think it's probably not as worth it, and you're probably better off using the EXE ability, I think. So yeah, on to Ismo. I think they just fixed a couple of stuff, and it's nothing really significant. And moving on to Iva. Iva has always been in a little bit of a weaker spot. She does offer a lot of utility and a lot of stuns, in caps, you know, all those sort of things. But her damage output has been a little weaker. And so in this patch, SLS buffed her damage up a little bit. So her mouse 1 reload time has been reduced from 1.1 seconds to 1 second. So she can use her mouse 1 a lot more often nowadays. Her machine gun, that is her ultimate ability, has got its total damage increased from 140 to 160. The big thing is that it's not that the channel time has been increased, but the projectile's damage has been increased. So that will make her ultimate that much more stronger, I believe, and should help her out a little bit, I think. And moving on, her EXE ability, that is her in-cap ability, has got its cooldown reduced to 7 to match the normal base E ability. So you don't actually like get that increased cooldown when you use the EXE instead of the E. So that's nice to have. And her burning oil damage has been increased. So burning oil is the debuff that you put on people when you burn them, or with your abilities like your mouse 2 or your EX mouse 1, when they have the oil debuff on them. So this pretty much just is also just a buff to her damage output. So yeah, it's got some nice buffs all around. Some of her Battleites has been changed as well to give her a little bit more, how to say, kick to those Battleites. So like for example, her heavy rocket also inflicts the snare to enemies in the explosion area, so not just the person that was targeted. Durable shield increases her shield bonus on herself from 8 to 12, which is really nice, because I think otherwise she can be a bit squishy sometimes, because her shield actually doesn't really shield for that much. So yeah, pretty cool to see. I missed hyper speed earlier, but basically the reload speed bonus has been increased from 100% to 220% to match the attack speed bonus. Not too sure what this means, but I'm guessing it just has to do with the mouse 1 reload time being reduced from 1.1 seconds to 1 second. Moving on to Igniting Spark, it's got a bit of buffs as well. Well, I think it's a buff because you no longer need to trigger the spell block for it to work. And before this, if you triggered the spell block, I think it's 10 damage, I'm not too sure, but now it consumes oil to inflict burning oil instead, which would deal a total of 24 damage. Of course, the catch here is that you gotta inflict the oil first and then use E, which might be a bit tricky in some situations, but overall it is also a damage boost, I guess. I'm not sure if this is that great, but could be nice if you feel that you always consume oil, and then, or rather, if you always inflict some oil and then use it on the enemy or something. So yeah. On to Jumong, there's a bug fix now. Nothing much, nothing too significant. Lucie has gotten a little bit of buffs. I think Lucie has been in a pretty good spot, but I think SLS feels that she could use a little bit more power. So they did buff her a little bit by changing up some of her Battlerites. Basically just improving the effects of them, I suppose. Like this one just increased, like for Vampire Toxin, the healing fatigue was increased. For Blast Shield, the damage has been increased. For Potency, the damage and healing has been increased. Just overall like a numbers buff, and but at the expense of her Chaos Battlerite, which is her AoE Panic Battlerite, being nerfed slightly. So as far as I can tell, the Chaos Battlerite now gives a bigger AoE effect, so the radius has been increased, and the damage has been increased, but the catch is that you only get the AoE effect if you hit a target. You can no longer just use the explosion to panic enemies. You actually have to hit a single enemy now to get the AoE effect. So yeah, that's how they sort of changed this Battlerite up. But I think the buffs to the Battlerite, even though like they nerfed it a little bit with you having to hit the target first, it's sort of justified and it sort of balances out, I think, as far as I can see and as far as I can tell. So yeah, her swift roll has its haste duration increased from 2 seconds to 2.5 seconds, which is a boost to her survivability, and I think it's very much welcome because Lucie can still be rushed down fairly easily now, even in 3 vs 3s. So this is nice to have. Moving on to Pearl, nothing much other than I think just a little bit of fixes here and there. Same with Pestilus. And finally, Poloma, one of the big champions that people felt needed to be nerfed. I actually predicted that like she wouldn't be changed much. Like what I mean by that, as in like her base abilities wouldn't be changed much because people typically complain about her other side. And while it is true that her other side is her strongest ability and that it is probably the reason for her strong pick rate and all that, but it is also her identity, you know, that's what Poloma brings to the table. And so I predicted that they wouldn't really change her base abilities too much. And it is reflected here where they just reduced her Ghost Wolf damage a little bit. So instead of doing a total of 48 damage, it deals a total of 45 damage now. So just a slight nerf, but the main changes were to her Battlerites. More specifically, they changed her Phantasm because I think people felt that the damage reduction factor was a bit too big. And so yeah, they reduced it from 40% to 33%, and the damage amplifier factor has been reduced from 25 to 20%. So this basically reduced the power of Phantasm a little bit. I think it's still a good Battlerite because 33% is still nothing to scoff at. And yeah, it might reduce the pick rate of Phantasm a little bit, but I think it's still a great Battlerite to have. Moving on to Spirit Rift. The haste. So Spirit Rift is the one where you get the haste buff when you use your Q ability. So now that haste buff is only applied if you successfully hit somebody with your Q. So you cannot just use the Q just for the haste speed buff, which I think it is quite fair, honestly. So that's good. Her Soul Essence now probably EX compatible. I believe Soul Essence was the one which reduces the cooldown of a Q if she managed to panic somebody. So it is compatible with the EX ability now, the EX Q I mean. And Silver Fang has got its range bonus reduced from 20% to 10%, which I think is very fair because Silver Fang was really strong, especially against like multiple range enemies, because she can pretty much just outrange everybody with the E, and she can safely stay behind and use her E, and it was really hard to punish Poloma basically. So now she has to go a little bit forward to use her E, and yeah, and that gives opponents a little bit more opportunity to sort of jump onto her and make her use the other side, and then they can like continue to punish her teammates and so on. So yeah, pretty good changes, I think, very fair changes. And as a Poloma main, I'm glad that they didn't over nerf her. I think these are all very fair. Moving on to Rook, there's just a couple of fixes to some Battlerites. And finally, Ruh Kaan got a bit of buffs. Ruh Kaan has been in a pretty, I would say, underpowered spot. Not to say he's really, really weak, because I think he was still pretty strong, but they sort of gave him a little bit more power for his Battlerites now, which I really like. So first of all, his Consume has got its cooldown reduced from 9 seconds to 8 seconds, which is good to see because I think people felt like Ruh Kaan was a little bit too squishy, and so even with all that healing, I know, right? And so they reduced the cooldown for his Q, which is nice to see because like this also gives him a little bit more offensive capabilities, because if you absorb an attack with Q, you actually regain your weapon charge. So this is nice to see. They've merged some of the Battlerites together, so like Leech Blade has got its effects combined with Taint. So basically now when he hits someone with the with his mouse one and they have curse on them, he gets more healing, plus the charge attack also gives him more healing. So they basically merged like his Battlerites together, so that this Leech Blade is his main healing Battlerite right now. Moving on to Affliction, they increased the duration of Amplifier from 3 seconds to 4 seconds, which is nice to see. Just gives him a little bit of buff to his damage output, and also his team's damage output actually. I can't remember what Nether Chains is, so we'll just skip that for now. Cold Embrace is another one where they sort of merge two Battlerites together. So this Cold Embrace now gives his E ability Root plus curse, so that's really nice. I think it will almost always be a must pick because this basically increases his offensiveness when he uses his E ability because it roots the enemy, and then like the enemy will be stuck there for him, and curse for him to hit them a couple of times for like increased damage and healing. So I think that's really nice. And I think the rest are just some tooltip changes. Shifu's got some bug fixes, Taya's got some bug fixes, and finally Thorn's got some nerfs, as most people can expect. His Moss 1 energy gain has been reduced, and his space cooldown has been increased slightly. So the space cooldown only starts now once Thorn has completely descended. So basically, you can think of it as a 0.7 second cooldown increase, which is quite okay, I think. I don't think they should let the cooldown start only once he come up, because Thorn is already quite susceptible to being focused down the moment he uses his spacebar. So like his spacebar is his only sort of escape, and so yeah, I think giving it any more than this 0.7 second cooldown reduction or increase would be too much, I think. And so yeah, that's all the nerfs to Thorn, because I think it is quite fair actually, because Thorn is only strong when he's like paired up with Poloma and Destiny, but outside of that he's actually quite okay. So I think these nerfs are quite alright. This sort of reduces his energy gain a little bit so that it's a bit harder to get his ultimate ability, which is fine, I think. And finally to Varesh. Varesh gotten a tiny bit of nerfs, and so his healing and damage when consuming those debuffs have been reduced a little bit. And the cast time of the EX Mouse 2 has been increased from 0.4 seconds to 0.5 seconds. Because I think what they felt was that it was too easy for him to apply both debuffs to enemies with his EX Mouse 2. So that's why they nerfed it. And also Varesh felt like when he could get those silence chains off with his E ability, it was really hard to deal with, and there was a lot of damage that was going out. So I think that's why they sort of nerfed his abilities a little bit. So but they did sort of buff his Battlerite a little bit to compensate for that. So I would say it sort of balances out. So there were some nerfs to his base abilities, but a bit of buffs to his Battlerites, which to compensate for those nerfs. So Devastation's got its bonus damage increased from 3 to 4. Kinetic Corruption, formerly Kinetic Judgment, now reduces the cooldown of kinetic energy by 3 seconds and applies Corruption on enemies hit. So before this, Kinetic Judgment was the Battlerite which lets you inflict the pink debuff onto enemies that you hit, but now it afflicts the blue debuff instead. So it's not as strong because the pink debuff is the one that silences the enemy when you proc it with your E ability. But they did, give a little bit of a cooldown reduction as well. So I guess it's kind of fair. You get to use it more often, but it's not as obnoxious to deal with, with the silence and all that. I'm not sure if this would be I feel like this is actually a bigger nerf than all of this up here, like to his base abilities, because his Kinetic Judgment barrel was actually really strong with that silence effect. But I guess we'll have to see. Varesh is really hard enough to use, and oh man, poor thing. And finally, Synergy now also increases the factor of Corruption and Judgment by 5% when both are active. So basically, Synergy is the one that lets you reapply both debuffs every time you use your mouse one on an enemy when they have both debuffs on them already. So this basically increases the factor of Corruption and Judgment. Basically, Judgment increases the damage that the enemy takes, right? So what this means is that if you have Synergy and if you have both debuffs on an enemy, the enemy will take 20% more damage instead of just 15%. And for Corruption, they will deal 20% less damage instead of 15%, which I think it's a really nice buff to his Synergy Battlerite. And it would pretty much be a must pick, I would say, because when you have both on the same target and you can keep reapplying them, you're pretty much gimping the enemy by quite a lot, I would say, for as long as you can hit them with your mouse one. So I think this is a nice change to Synergy. But we have to see what are the true effects to Varesh with this Kinetic Judgment nerf. So yeah, that was about it for these patch notes. I went on a little bit too long for my liking, but unfortunately there's so much things to cover. There's so many changes to all the champions. Overall, I'm really happy with all the balance changes. I am a bit concerned about Alysia because she does seem like she has been buffed a lot, and I didn't feel that she was too weak before the patch. She was only weak to being rushed down by multiple melees, but outside of that she was actually okay, so we will have to see whether she's too OP now or whatnot. But in any case, I hope you guys enjoy the patch. Zander is finally here. I know I'm going to be playing a lot of Zander, I'm going to be playing a lot of Alysia, and yeah, stay subscribed for my Zander video that should be coming out soon, Jade guide, Zander guides and so on. And so yeah, hope you guys have a great day, keep gaming, stay chill, and I'll see you guys in the next one, okay? Bye bye.